There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So let me start with a kind of a introduction to Christians Against Christian Nationalism. It was started in 2019 as an initiative of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. The BJC was started in 1936. It's a faith-based advocacy organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., which focuses on upholding the historic Baptist principle of religious liberty. They have a website, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, that encourages Christians to sign a statement, the Christians Against Christian Nationalism statement. Over 3,000 Californians have signed it, 900 in Oregon, and over 1,400 in Washington and Minnesota have signed that statement. In January 2024, I held the first meeting for Christians Against Christian Nationalism in Minnesota in the basement of my church, Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. And the support provided to me from BJC was they sent an invitation out to the people who had signed their statement in the Twin Cities area, which was a great help because it's great to have an email list like that. I had hoped to have 20 or 25 people show up, and we had over 100 on that first night. So what we found out was there was a lot of concern about Christian nationalism, but not a way to communicate that. So if somebody in downtown Minneapolis who was a Baptist, he didn't know that there was a Methodist in the suburbs that was also concerned. And so this is a way that people can communicate and coordinate. It proved to be a successful model of a community organizing. And so in the fall of 2024, BJC hired Joy, who's going to be speaking later, as the community partnership manager to grow more community-based groups. So what is Christian nationalism? Christian nationalism is just a minute, let me move this over here. Sorry. Christian nationalism is a political ideology and a cultural framework that seeks to merge Christian and American identities. It suggests that real Americans are Christians and true Christians hold a particular set of political beliefs. Christian nationalism demands Christianity be privileged by the state, and it implies that to be a good American, one must be Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy, racial injustice, and patriarchy. And kind of this basic belief of Christian nationalism, this is taken from a book, The Flag and the Cross, which came out in 2022. America was founded as a Christian nation by white men who were traditional Christians who based the nation's founding on documents on Christian principles. The United States is blessed by God, which is why it has been so successful. And the nation has a special role to play in God's plans for humanity. But these blessings are threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences, both inside and outside the borders. What we say this a lot is that Christian nationalism threatens American democracy by distorting Americans' promise of religious freedom for all, and distorts Christianity by taking its central message, a gospel of love and service, and turning it into a false idol of power and male domination. So just repeat the phrase, Christian nationalism is a threat to both democracy and to Christianity. It's also, as Christians, as Christians who believe in the Christianity based upon love and service, we must stand up and speak out against Christian nationalism, especially when it inspires acts of violence and intimidation, including vandalism, bomb threats, arson, hate crimes, attacks on houses of worship, and religious communities at home and abroad, which is what January 6th, the storming of the Capitol was. But I also want to just emphasize that word abroad in that statement, because Christian nationalism or religious supremacy is not just here in this country, it's spread around the world in a number of different countries. So let's dive a little bit deeper into understanding Christian nationalism. I'm going to share a couple of slides with you from a study that was done, released in 2023 from the Public Religious Research Institute, PRRI, and Brookings. They went out and interviewed a large sampling of Americans and asked them 5 questions. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. If the USA moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. And you can look at the percentage of people who agree with those statements. And then once they did that, they took a look at a spectrum of a scale of people, and they divided people into 4 categories: adherents, kind of the true believers; sympathizers, people who kind of lean towards that direction; skeptics, people who lean get away from that; and rejectors, who probably didn't agree with any of those 5 statements. So in 2023, the survey found that in this country, 10% are adherents, 19% are sympathizers, 39% are skeptics, and 29% are rejectors, and 4% no score. Then last year, this is one other fact that they came out with that survey. They looked at the Christian nationalism scale by religious attendance. And so they looked at people who attend church once a week and found that the adherents are 21% and sympathizers are 29%. What I found interesting is when you look at the people who never attend or seldom attend church, they still found 5% of those people are adherents and 13% are sympathizers, which kind of means that Christian nationalism is more of a heritage than a theology. It's just like a Jewish person does not need to attend a synagogue to be considered a Jew. But I also want to point out that of the people who attend church once a week, 38% are skeptics and 9% are rejectors. So they're still Christians that attend church all the time. Then last year, they brought out a study that looked at adherents and sympathizers by state. And you can see the whole country there. 20% in California are adherents, 17% in Oregon, which is the lowest in the country, and then 20% in Washington, D.C., and in Minnesota, we're at 28%. So I want to dig in now onto what I consider to be the engine or the driving force behind Christian nationalism, which is New Apostolic Reformation. And there's a book out by Matthew D. Taylor called The Violent Take It by Force. And we'll come back to the title later. But this whole book is about the New Apostolic Reformation. And he has this chart that says, okay, we have the big diagram of the American Christianity. Within that, we have the Pentecostal charismatic movement, and then the independent charismatics, and then the apostolic and prophetic movement. And then finally, the driving engine for us is this New Apostolic Reformation. So let me explain that and talk about that now. It started with a gentleman called C. Peter Wagner. He was a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. He became fixated on this independent charismatic network that could be seen as a center of future growth in the church. In 1996, he adopted the phrase New Apostolic Reformation. And it was used to describe post-denominational charismatic work of God by modern-day apostles and prophets. And this is the Bible verse that they use a lot. It's from Ephesians. And God gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and some teachers. And their theory was that we've got evangelists and pastors and teachers. What we need is more prophets and more apostles. And that led to the apostolic and prophetic governance of the church, which led to the Seven Mountain Mandate, which led to strategic spiritual warfare. And we're going to talk about each of those 3 briefly. So apostolic and prophet governance works. Apostles primarily govern the church while being advised by supernaturally through prophets. Prophets cannot self-proclaim, they need to be recognized by the Eagle Vision Apostle team. And this diagram over here, this interlocking circle, shows some of the major players in this movement and how they're connected to these overall groups of like the International Coalition of Apostolic Leaders. And these are global networks. Apostles and prophets can be men and women. And there's thousands of global apostles and prophets who do not compete, but collaborate globally. Now we're going to talk about the gentleman at the very bottom of that square. And then later at the very end, I'm going to talk about the gentleman to the left of him with the long hair. But that person is Sean On. He's a pastor at Harvest Rock Church in Pasadena. He leads the Harvest International Ministry, and he's the chancellor of Wagner University, named after C. Peter Wagner. And this is a quote from January 6th. I believe that this week we're going to throw Jezebel out and Jehu's going to rise up, and we're going to rule and reign through President Trump and under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And he was one of the key figures in organizing the January 6th insurrection. But he's very strong. He's very powerful. He has, in 65 countries, about 25,000 churches. Now, those may be small churches, but they're still churches. So that led to something called the Seven Mountain Mandate. And that was created by Lance Wallnew, who is another leading light in the Christian nationalism movement. The seven mountains are religion, family, education, media, government, business, and arts. And in each country has their own seven mountains. And the theory behind this, what they believe, is that right now there's a hierarchy of demons that are at the top and control each of these mountains. And Christians are mandated to conquer each of these seven mountains and install kingdom-minded and kingdom-motivated individuals at the top of each mountain. And then we have a top-down influence of politics. And they want to take control of the mountaintop, and then Christianity will have dominion throughout the country. So there really is no separation of church and state on this. And if you want to see how this influences, how much this has influences, it has. Last year, I went to the National Day of Prayer, and this is the program that was handed out in St. Paul, but this is a program that was used throughout the country for the National Day of Prayer. And you can see they have 7 topics on the agenda: church, family, education, business and work, military, government, arts, and entertainment media. So this was a National Day of Prayer completely bought into the Seven Mountain Mandate. Now, probably the most concerning is this strategic spiritual warfare. And they're not hiding this. They're putting out books talking about it. And they use a couple of verses, this from Ephesians, where you put on the armor of God. You take the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. And then the verse from Matthew 11:12. Since the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violence take it by force. Which, as you remember, this was the title of this book, and that's why he took it, because this is kind of a guiding verse for the new apostolic movement. And so what this led to was January 6th, that the prophets and apostles are the generals in the fight against demonic forces. They have special authority to cast out and conquer demons. And this led to January 5th, Jericho marches around the national capital, where they were praying and singing and blowing shofars. And that led to the storming of the Capitol, where they wanted to keep Donald Trump as president. Just to remind you, many people were injured, including 174 police officers. 4 officers who were responded to the attack died by suicide within 7 months. Now, this is probably the most concerning slide I'm going to show you. This is from a study that was actually released earlier this year from PRRI, and they looked at two statements. I'll read the statements. There's a storm coming soon that will sweep away the elites in power and restore the rightful leaders. So 25% of Americans believe that. 55% of adherents believe that. And then the second statement, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Again, 17% of all Americans believe that, and 38% of adherents. I'm going to give you a couple more quotes. This is from our friend Lance Walnew in the middle of 2024. Harris represents the spirit of Jezebel in a way that'll be even much more ominous than Hillary because she brings a racial component and she's younger. Biden's out, as we prophesied. Kamala's in. My guess is that the devil's plan is to make her president. And this is from Franklin Graham, October 21st. There's a spiritual element that's at work here. There are dark forces that are arrayed against this man. They've tried to put him in prison. They've tried to assassinate him twice. He's attacked every day by the media. We pray for our nation, and Father, if it be thy will, that President Trump will win this election. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen. Well, breaking news, Trump won. And I want to take one look at one factor of his winning, and that was the role of Christianity. It was no surprise, but 81% of white evangelical voted for Trump, which is just about the same number as in the two previous elections. But what I did find surprising was that 60% of white Catholics and 60% of white non-evangelical Protestants supported Trump. Then there's one other slide I want to share with you. This is from a survey that was done before the November 24th election that looked at 68% of white Christians were supporting Trump. But if you look at Christians of color, it was 33%, non-Christian religions, 30%, and the religiously unaffected, 28%. And this was a statement provided by Robert P. Jones, president of PRRI, to Time Magazine right after the election. I think this pretty sums up the way I feel. Over the last decade, many white Christians had not just selfishly supported a dangerous, narcissistic man who promised to restore their waning influence, they have now willingly blessed the advent of a new American fascism that threatens our democratic future. They are principally responsible for Trump's rise and return to power, and for everything that is coming for all of us in its wake. And if we've learned anything the last 3 or 4 months, there's a lot of things coming. So how do we respond? How do we resist? There's two foundations for responding and resisting: theological and secular. I'll talk about each of them. Theologically, it's based upon Jesus' teaching in the gospel. There's a number of organizations that are resisting Christian nationalism based on theology. As I already have mentioned, Baptist Joint Committee and Christians Against Christian Nationalism, Faithful America, Interfaith Alliance, Poor People's Campaign, Kairos Center, and PRRI. If there's one thing I'd like to encourage you to do after this presentation, when we get time, is go visit the websites Christians Against Christian Nationalism, Faithful America, and Interfaith Alliance. You'll find a lot more resources and a lot of information about what's going on this fight. So what do we base our Christianity on? It's based upon what Jesus said in the Gospels. His first public words: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." Not to the rich, not to the wealthy, to the poor. Love your neighbor as yourself. From Matthew 5:44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. It's a great parable. The message is powerful in the Good Samaritan parable. And I consider myself a Matthew 25 Christian. In fact, I have a book here that says Matthew 25, Christianity, Redeeming Church and Society. I encourage you to read it. Um, but when the blessed people said, why are we being blessed? Why are we being chosen? They were told, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. And finally, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, and blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, when I've given these presentations, I've been in some discussions, some people will say, well, Christian nationalism, they use the Bible and they quote verses. Why are your verses better? And I guess it's just a kind of a different view thing that said, what I have heard and read is that Christian nationalists use the Bible verses to discuss sin and Jesus' death and resurrection and having a personal relationship with Jesus. But I just went through, Jesus spoke often about loving your neighbor and helping the poor. And I think that's the basis of our Christianity. And just to be clear, Jesus never said anything about gay people or abortion. And most importantly, Jesus never said anything about the United States of America. It's a little joke. I kind of like it, though. It just puts things in perspective. And then the secular approach is based upon the separation of church and state. Organizations working on this is the ACLU, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and Freedom from Religion Foundation. I attended last year's summit for the Americans United. There were 1,000 people there. They were evenly divided between people of faith and secular people, and there was this uniting force to work on this issue to protect the separation of church and state. So let's just read what it says in the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble or to petition the government for release of grievances. That is based upon the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Thomas Jefferson and passed by the Virginia General Assembly on January 16th, 1786. So I'm going to give you kind of two guiding statements that's helpful in what we're talking about. The first is from Amanda Tyler. She's the executive director. And she said, for the fight against Christian nationalism to be successful, it must be led by Christians so that it is not seen as anti-Christian. And I think it's really important that we are out there leading this. So we're standing up for our religion. The second quote is from a book that just recently came out called Strange Worship. It literally just was released a couple months ago by Drew Street. He says in the chapter 7, an invitation to get in the way, I believe that congregations across America are where God has pitched a tent to mobilize a challenger movement against Christian nationalism. Congregations are strategically positioned for this work. And so again, he's looking to individuals and churches to lead this fight. So what are some actions you can take? First, we got to remember that there's no short-term solutions. Christian nationalism has spent decades building a movement. It will take years to respond. Now, really, if you think of Christian nationalism as a cover for white supremacy, they've been at it for hundreds of years. And really, we have just got started on this in the last 5 or 6. So read and support the organizations I've listed above. Enter into a dialogue with your friends and church members about Christian nationalism. Look for sympathizers, not adherents. You can start by saying, do you need to be a Christian to be a good American? Now, Pamela Cooper White has a book out called The Psychology of Christian Nationalism. That's right here. It's a really excellent book. But she has a paradigm for talking to people, the red light yellow light, green light. And if you're talking to somebody and you're seeing a red light, meaning that talking will do no good, at least not here, not now, not by me. A yellow light means try, but tread lightly. And a green light, and go deeper, but gently and wisely. Just as you kind of keep that in mind as you talk to people. Other actions, talk to your pastor to preach against Christian nationalism. Have your congregation publicly speak out against Christian nationalism and get in the way. If you have a flag in your sanctuary, remove it. I know that could be very difficult in some congregations, but I think it means that we're separating the church from the state. There's a good Facebook group, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, that you could join to get more information about what we're doing. Ask politicians that represent you about Christian nationalism. Partner with secular organizations. And then there's a movement out here you just should be aware of, the ex-evangelicals, people who have left a Christian nationalism church because of either their gay children weren't treated well, or a woman was told she had to stay in her marriage even though the husband was cheating on her, who have left. And those are people that could be drawn back into our church, and we should just keep an eye out for those people. And then one more action to take is school board elections. And this applies all across the country. School board elections are important battlegrounds in the fight against Christian nationalism. Sometimes they are proving grounds for future state and national Christian nationalism legislators. So you want to support school board candidates who are against banning books and for teaching history and for protecting all students. And then look for candidates who have been endorsed by something called Moms for Liberty. In Minnesota, we have something called Minnesota Parents Alliance. So in your state, there may be another organization that is supporting more conservative candidates. Additional actions you can take: start a book study group at your church, and these are excellent books as far as being used in a church. And I would recommend this book by Jim Wallace, The False White Gospel. It's got 8 chapters. You can do 2 chapters a week for 4 weeks. It's just a great study. And I just mentioned the Strange Worship book, which just came out. Again, 6 steps. You could do that in 3 weeks. If you have your local book group, I suggest that you have one of these books that you read. Now, Catherine Stewart book just came out a month ago. It's excellent, and she talks a lot about the dark money behind this. It also is quite disturbing. Probably the most famous book on this slide is the Jesus and John Wayne. And again, that came out in 2021, so it shows kind of how new this whole movement is. But it talks a lot. It's a really very good book for understanding Christian nationalism. Share a video, God and Country. It was based upon a book by Catherine Stewart called The Power of Worshippers. And the producer was Rob Reiner. And then Bad Faith is a feature-length documentary that looks at the rise of Christian nationalism. There's 2 other videos I would recommend, and I just cannot recommend the video of James Talarico giving a sermon. It's excellent. You can find that on YouTube. And then Amanda Tyler came to Hennepin Church right after the election, and she spoke about her book. Her book is How to End Christian Nationalism. And there's some raw emotions shared on that video, so I would encourage you to talk about that. In my presentation with taking a look at 2 sides of the Christian nationalism coin. So the head side, let's say, is with Bishop Marianne Edgar Budd. And I think probably everybody on the call remembers that she was the pastor at the service on Inauguration Day, and she spoke directly to President Trump. And you may have read that she did that, but I'm not sure. Probably most of you haven't actually read what she said. And I think it's worth hearing what she said to President Trump. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, independent families, some who fear for their lives. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Now, I find these very Christian, almost holy words that can be shared. Now, on the other side of the coin is Sean Foote. On the evening of the election, he recorded a video in the airport about his experience at that service, and this is what he said. The most disgraceful and embarrassing thing I've ever witnessed. It exposed the demon behind wokeness. It exposed how crazy these people are, how demonic they are, how inspired by the pits of hell they are. We banded together to pray, and we broke off that spirit, and we broke off her witchcraft. So I'm not going to end it there because I can't end it with his picture. So I'll just end. We'll go back to Bishop, and I'll just say, thank you for inviting me to share a little bit about Christian nationalism. I hope you have learned something from here.